Welcome to Faith and Freedom, an audio feature produced by the Wagner Faith and Freedom Center located on the campus of Spring Arbor University. The Wagner Faith and Freedom Center serves as the nation's academic voice for faith, family, and freedom. And now here's your host for Faith and Freedom, Professor William Wagner.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Faith and Freedom Podcast. My name is Salvatore Biondo, and as you can probably tell, I am not your usual host, Will Wagner. And that is because Will is currently doing something remarkable. And something that remarkable is exactly what this episode is going to be about. Will is in Washington, D.C., leading a group of students from Fond du Lac Christian School in Wisconsin on what I believe is genuinely a once-in-a-lifetime trip. And the timing could not be more significant. They are there during our nation's 250th anniversary. 250 years since the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. Today, I want to unpack why this trip matters, what these students are experiencing at our nation's capital, and share a word directly from Will himself. So let's get into it. 250 years. Think about what that number actually means. In 1776, a group of men, many of them with deep Christian faith, put their signatures on a document that declared to the world that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They did not claim these rights from political philosophy alone. They grounded them in a Creator. They appealed to the laws of nature and of nature's God. The founding of this nation was not a secular enterprise. It was shaped at its core by a biblical worldview. And now, 250 years later, we live in a moment where that inheritance is sometimes being questioned, reinterpreted, and in some cases openly rejected. So what does that mean to mark this anniversary? I would argue that it means more than fireworks and celebration. It means returning to the source, understanding what was actually built and why it matters, and what it will cost to preserve it. That is exactly what Will Wagner is doing with these students right now as we speak. He is taking them to the place where it all happened, where the documents live, where the monuments stand, and where the story is still being told in stone, marble, and iron. And he is helping them see it through a lens of faith. Washington, D.C. is unlike any other city in the world. It is a place where the ideals of a nation are written in stone. And when you walk through the city with lenses of faith in your eyes, you begin to see something that the tour books often miss. Just think about standing in front of the World War II Memorial, looking at the Freedom Wall, which each gold star represents 100 American lives lost during World War II. That's more than 400,000 deaths. The sacrifice reflected there echoes John 15:13, which states, quote, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends," end quote. For a student standing there, that is not just ancient history. That is the cost of freedom they are walking in right now. Or consider the Lincoln Memorial, where Lincoln's second inaugural address is engraved on the wall, a speech so filled with scripture that historians have sometimes called it a sermon in stone. Lincoln believed God ruled over nations. He said so publicly at the height of civil war in the United States, in front of the entire country. And then there's the Washington Monument, 550 feet tall. At the very top, engraved in an aluminum capstone, there are two Latin words you cannot see from the ground: Laus Deo, praise be to God. Washington himself declared in his farewell address that religion and morality are indispensable from political prosperity. That monument is a silent witness to that conviction. And then there is the Museum of the Bible, where traces of Scripture's influence on the founding of this nation exist. The Supreme Court, where Moses is holding the Ten Commandments, is carved into the building itself. The Library of Congress, with biblical inscriptions etched onto its walls. The National Archives, where you can stand within feet of the actual Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of our nation. And then there are places like Arlington National Cemetery, sacred ground where the cost of freedom is unmistakable. The U.S. Capitol, where the founding figures steeped in Christian thought once debated on the shape of our new republic. Mount Vernon, George Washington's estate. Every one of these places tells a story, not just a political story, a spiritual story. A story about what happens when a people ground their liberty in something greater than themselves. Now, before I go any further, I want to share something directly from Will Wagner since he could not be here with us today. He wanted to speak to all of you listening, even in his absence, and I think this captures the heart of why this field trip matters so much to him and to the Faith and Freedom Center. Here's what he said. We are committed to equipping the next generation to lead with both conviction and courage, grounded in faith, guided by truth, and devoted to the preservation of freedom. In our nation's capital, students will not only study the principles that shaped America, but be inspired to live them out with purpose and integrity. Conviction and courage, grounded in faith, guided by truth, that is a calling not just for these students in Washington this week, but for every one of us. Let me take a moment and talk about why this kind of investment in young people matters so much, especially right now in the 250th anniversary of our nation. Each generation receives freedom as an inheritance, but an inheritance is not permanent unless the heirs understand its value and how to guard it. George Washington warned that religion and morality are the pillars of political prosperity. He was not speaking in abstract terms. He was speaking from lived experience on the battlefield, from the burden of leadership, from years of watching what happens when a people lose their moral grounding. The students from Fond du Lac Christian School are standing in those halls right now. They are looking at the same words Lincoln wrote, standing on the same ground where men and women gave everything so that freedom could survive another generation. And the hope is that they do not just look at it, they internalize it, that they carry it home, that they become the kind of people who do not just benefit from freedom, but who are willing to live for it and fight for it. That is what the Faith and Freedom Center is about. That is what Will is doing on this trip. That is what this podcast is trying to be a part of right now and every single week.
Growing deep roots means anchoring yourself to Jesus Christ, the source of all life and learning. Here at Spring Arbor University, faith and academics work hand in hand, grounding you in truth and wisdom. With a close-knit Christian community by your side, you'll grow strong, ready to face life's challenges. At SAU, you won't just learn, you'll thrive. Grow deep roots at Spring Arbor University. Visit arbor.edu today.
Now for our final wrap. As we close out today, I want to leave you with one thought. 250 years ago, men pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to something they believed was bigger than themselves. Many of them paid that ultimate price. They did it because they believed that freedom is not just a political arrangement, it is a moral responsibility. It is something given by God and sustained by the faithfulness of people who receive it. Freedom is not free. That phrase is carved in the Korean War Veterans Memorial. It is true militarily, it is true politically, and it is true spiritually. So as Will leads these students through Washington this week, pray for them. Pray that what they see does not just become a memory, but a calling. That they return home grounded in faith, guided by truth, and devoted to the preservation of freedom that was entrusted to us. Thank you for joining me on today's Faith and Freedom podcast. We will be back next week with another episode. Until then, go and live faithfully.